For as much as Star Wars is known for its lightsaber duels and its pretty scary bad guy, it's also known for its beautiful designs of Millennium Falcon, TIE Fighters, and that big ball thing that blows up planets. But which are the ones we never got to see? With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Star Wars. Here are 10 Star Wars starfighters we never got to see.
Number 10, the Tywing. This is sort of a combination between the TIE Fighter and the Y-Wing Starfighter. Now, it didn't have an awful lot of cargo space, and it didn't have an awful lot of weaponry, and it didn't have an awful lot of engines, so really, it's kind of like a scooter in space.
The Tywing, as it was affectionately called, first appeared in the novel X-Wing, The Krytos Trap.
Now, while it combined some of the elements of the two starfighters mentioned, it didn't take any of the good bits. So if you were assigned a TIE fighter, that's almost definitely what was going to happen to you. They're armed with very, very light lasers. They don't even have proton torpedoes. I mean, really? If you were given one of these, you probably would feel bad about yourself, and you would be right to do so. Because if you're assigned one of these, you done messed up, son. You done messed up. 9. SAS-18's Sharp Spiral concept. Not a lot is known about this particular starfighter other than it first appeared in the video game Star Wars Jedi Starfighter in 2002. It was designed by Amy Beth Christensen, and for one reason or another, it never actually made it on screen. It was supposed to be piloted by the Jedi SAS-18. Now, while he appeared in Revenge of the Sith, this starfighter didn't, and would possibly be better if it had, because he's one of the 3 Jedi that went to arrest Emperor Palpatine. That went well, didn't it? It does, however, appear in the novelization of Revenge of the Sith. In the Clone Wars, he didn't get to use this either. He did appear quite a bit, but it was in one of those standard Jedi starfighters, like the one we see Obi-Wan piloting in Episode 2. This had a very angular, mean look about it. It's a shame it didn't get on screen. 8. EXTIE Fighter. Now, this kind of the clue is in the name for this one, alright? So you have the central and nose section of an X-Wing starfighter, and yet you've got the wings of the TIE Fighter. Now, this is one of the uglies. And yep, that's not me just being a meanie, that's actually what they're called. That is because they're really cobbled together, they're kitbash. That is effectively what these ships are. Now, it's similar to a standard X-Wing in that you have room for the cockpit and room for the astromech droid. However, it's also armed with the same weapons of a standard TIE fighter. Now, it was slightly better armed than your average TIE fighter. It actually had proton torpedoes that could be fired from the inside of the wings. However, it never went into mass production because it could be easily outmatched by your standard starfighter. 7. The ZScepter. Now, another one of the uglies fleet. This combined the spherical cockpit of the Tywings, but it actually had the front fuselage of the Headhunter, which we will come back to later on in this list. One of the most distinctive things about this particular starfighter was the layout and specifically where the astromech droid went. Now, if you think of an X-Wing starfighter or even a Y-Wing, you think the astromech droid, it generally goes vertically behind the pilot, but that is not the case with the ZScepter. In this ship, the astromech droid actually goes horizontally into the nose of the starfighter. This is another ship that's actually only been seen in comics so far. Now, it's such a mental little design, it remains to be seen if it's ever actually going to make it to the screen. 6. The Y-TIE. A little bit different from the earlier TIE, Y-Wing, it was a crazy Friday, nobody really knows who's the real father, kind of a put together, is that this one was actually good. Now, that's not to say the other one was terrible. No. Everything else about the other one says that the other one is terrible. This one actually combined the best elements of the Tywing and Y-Wing starfighters. Now, the Y-Wing Starfighter and the TIE Fighter were two of the most common ships in either respective fleet, with obviously the X-Wings probably outnumbering the Y-Wings. However, it was a very well-armed ship. Now, it wasn't very maneuverable, but the armaments really did make up for its lack of speed and agility. It didn't have a hyperdrive, so it wasn't very good for long-distance missions. However, it was usually to be found as an envoy or maybe even a security detail for particularly pirate vessels. 5. The Carrion Spike. This is a funny one because it's actually a relatively recent addition to the Star Wars franchise. However, it's been retroactively added to the history. It was made into Grand Moff Tarkin's personal ship. Now obviously, Tarkin was in Star Wars A New Hope and kind of in Rogue One, but he was certainly so high up that he absolutely qualified for getting his own vessel. This ship was in fact so impressively strong, the only weakness it had was the spine that connected the engines to the rest of the ship. Now, even this weakness was only really an issue if the shields were down, because it could book it out of there. Its hyperdrive was among the best of any ship in the franchise. It could do a constant run from the outer rim to Coruscant without having to drop out of hyperspace. It was actually such an advanced ship that a group of rebels did manage to steal it, but then abandoned it for fear of betrayal. They were worried their own guys were going to be like, no, I don't want this one on my hands. So they in fact left it go, and it was then taken back by the Empire. Now, unfortunately, it got a bit of an ignoble end. It was in fact destroyed by a Star Destroyer, because despite all of its advancements and despite its decent shielding, a group of pirates did manage to then take the ship. They ran afoul of the Empire, and then they got scattered into the winds. 4. The Alpha Class XG Starwing. Now, this vessel actually first appeared all the way back in 1993 in the video game that had to be loaded with a floppy disk. Now, for our younger audience, please think of a floppy disk as a 3D printed save button. This ship was actually, it's not often you say that to discover something about a vessel, I had to go and check some financial records, but that's where we had to find the information for this one, and I can tell you that this cost apparently 125,000 Republic credits. Probably one of the reasons it didn't go into mass production. It was somewhat similar in design to an Imperial shuttle, in that it had that tri-wing design, and it did have twin ion cannons, much like the TIE Fighters. However, it didn't really take off, and it wasn't designed for long distance missions. In fact, it only really had room for one pilot. The XGs are another class of ship from this list which have been seen in several games but have yet to be seen in any on-screen iteration. 3. The TIE Punisher. Now, the TIE Punisher was actually very similar to the TIE Bomber. If you think of the dual cockpit design, that's quite similar to Vader's TIE Fighter with the conical, or not conical, with the angled wings. Now, where the TIE Punisher is slightly different is that it's like the Bomber dialed up to 11, because every spare centimetre of this vessel was dedicated to armament. That's right, it was packed to bursting with bombs and missiles. Now, these ships were said to be involved in the attack during the evacuation of Yavin, which we saw a bit of in A New Hope, but not the entire battle. In fact, barely any of the battle. We only really saw the engagement with the Death Star. They were also present at Bespin's Cloud City, and basically these guys were tasked with taking on targets that your Star Destroyers really wouldn't have a hope of being able to follow. For example, if you think back to The Empire Strikes Back when they're hunting the Millennium Falcon through the asteroid field, this does not go well for some of the Star Destroyers. It would be ideal for the TIE Punisher. Now, while they were said to be involved in the evacuation of Yavin, they were also present during the Wookiee liberation of some of the Kessel detention camps, the same camps that we saw in Solo, a Star Wars story. But, as it stands, they are talked about and not seen. 2. The TIE Phantom multi-role stealth starfighter. The TIE Phantom, try saying that 10 times fast. This guy was the cream of the crop when it came to technological advancements in the Imperial fleet. However, they were not mass-produced. Now, the most obvious technological advancement of this vessel was its cloaking device, and that is a proper turn-the-ship invisible cloaking device, not just a deflector shield. That meant that this thing could get right up beside a rebel target and attack with no prior warning. It had the same solar panels as, say, the rest of the TIE fighters in the fleet, but it was a little bit different in that the cockpit of this vessel was conical instead of spherical. It was designed to have a pilot and a bomber as well. Now, these ships did have a hyperdrive, which meant they could be used for long-range attacks. Now, they were rare because they were quite difficult to produce. One of the reasons we haven't seen them on screen. But generally, if one of these guys was coming after you, you needed to say your prayers, because these things could hover 2 inches in front of your face, decloak and fire, and you would never know that they were coming. Number 1, the Z95 Headhunter. Now, these guys were effectively the predecessor of the X-Wing Starfighter. There's a couple of differences though. First difference being there was no room for an astromech droid. So this thing was just, it was the pilot and they were in charge of everything, much like pilots of today. Now also, the X-Wing is so distinctive for its wing pattern at the back of the ship. This had something similar to an X-Wing in a closed wing configuration. They didn't open up, but in this case they didn't need to. One of the real advancements that the Z95 Headhunter had over a lot of the rest of the fleet was that when a group of them came together, they were specifically designed to be able to throw a sort of a hollow matrix out that should give the impression of hundreds of other ships in the sky. Now, unfortunately, this was their main form of defense, and once the enemy was able to overcome that, they lost their strategic advantage. The ship has had something of a staggered introduction to the Star Wars franchise. They actually appeared all the way back in 1979 in some of the Star Wars Legends novels. Then going all the way forward, it appeared as a Clone Wars kind of an attack ship. They were said to be present at the Battle of Exegol, and also they did finally make a kind of an appearance in a Star Wars Commander video game in 2014. And that is everything for our list. If you reckon I have forgotten or missed one of the main vessels that you reckon should have been seen on screen, please drop it into the comments below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and go and check us out on Twitter. You can find us at Star Wars. You can also find myself at Sean Ferrick as well. Now guys, you know what I'm about to say next, so before I say it, look after yourself and may the Force be with you.